Robert, I didn't think we'd be talking. I did think we'd be talking to you at this time, but I didn't think we'd be talking about, hey, what do we do with Jonathan Smith at this point in the season? I thought we'd be talking about MSU jockeying for position, making a roll to a bowl game, and unfortunately, that's not the conversation we're having. It's still an interesting conversation, but and I do think Smith is a good coach, but it just kind of seems like he's lost the team a little bit. I don't always like that as a phrase, but there are some situations where it seems like a good coach or a coach that does have some ability just maybe it doesn't mesh well with a team and has a hard time turning them around. Is that kind of what you see, or is there something deeper here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably something along those lines. I mean, it's probably also not necessarily the most talented roster, and they've had some bad luck again on the injury front. But I mean, there's the phrase that's kind of going around right now that I've seen is they're allergic to winning, and you kind of see it. And I know that's kind of a odd phrase to say, but you know, there's not really one thing that you can put your finger on why they can't figure out the way to win some of these games. I mean, you know, some of those losses certainly, you know, the better team won when you look at, you know, games against USC and Indiana and probably Michigan as well. But then you look at last week against Minnesota, a team that they probably should have won that game. I mean, the win expectancy percentages probably would favor them in a lot of categories, and they couldn't find a way to win it, whether it was, you know, poor officiating in some regards, but also, you know, you gave a 80-yard drive in the last few minutes to let them tie it up, send overtime. It's just one thing after another. And I will say, I think Jonathan Smith has done a good job of keeping the team together in some regards. I mean, the fact that they, you know, came out last week and played well enough to win after that, you know, kind of putting it all out there too the week before against the rival Michigan. Again, they kind of unload all they have left. And the fact that they got them to play again, you know, well enough to win last week, I give them credit for that. But there's obviously something not working, and it's kind of getting to the boiling point, whether it's with the fans, the media is noticing it. You know, I'm sure the donors and the higher-ups are also kind of fed up. It's a tough spot to be, right? So I think he's not a bad coach. I just don't know if he's necessarily the right coach for what Michigan State needs right now and quite frankly, what they need moving forward.
With Jay Batt coming in, it was kind of, I guess, more in question than we talked about maybe in the first interview, because obviously he's going to want to install his guy. I don't necessarily know who that is. That's going to be kind of my next path to go down with you, because I'm not sure if I know there's been some articles thrown out there. Spartans Wire has had some things, but if he does get removed, I'm curious what you think here for a replacement, because I'm sure Batt, yeah, obviously he's got some experience with folks. I don't know if he's going to tap into that, or it's always interesting, the approach, because the fans, they always go to, okay, can we get James Franklin? Can we get, I feel like, I don't know if Urban Meyer was thrown out there for the Michigan State job, but he always gets thrown into the mix. Now Saban's coming back into the mix with these things, and we go for this fantasy booking kind of scenario. I'm not sure. Obviously, those are very lofty goals, but I'm not sure who you have your eye on and who you think is most likely here in the potential hiring process.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of options out there. I mean, obviously, the names you just mentioned are going to be the people that I think a lot of fans will, you know, clamor for and want. I personally, you know, if they could find a way to get James Franklin to come, I think would be a great hire. I don't know necessarily if he wants to stay in the Big Ten after what happened at Penn State. But I think ultimately you're going to have to look at probably a up-and-coming Group of Five head coach, you know, someone like an Alex Golish at USF. I know has some Midwest ties. That's someone that I personally have kind of circled and, you know, kept my eye on. I know there's some other SEC schools because, you know, he does coach down in Florida currently that will also probably make a pursuit for him. So that's probably my top guy at the list. But, I mean, there's a lot of good coaches out there, and I think what ultimately Michigan State needs to do is they need to go out and get a guy who's, you know, had consecutive but also consistent winning, regardless of at the level, right? I think Michigan State for now is, you know, the last two coach hires they've made have, you know, between Mel Tucker and then Jonathan Smith, don't necessarily have a long history of winning, right? They've had some good seasons, certainly, but they need to find a guy who maybe has done it, you know, more than once and maybe has been able to put it together at a consistent path that, you know, can be repeated at Michigan State. And another thing, too, I think it's kind of it's kind of, I don't know if it's a running bit or what you want to call it, but they need someone who shows a little bit more emotion on the sideline, I would say, than what you're seeing with Jonathan Smith. I know that really bothers a lot of fans. It hadn't really bothered me until this year, but you know, when you see some of the weeks that have gone by recently, you almost wonder how the players get motivated to play for him, because you don't really see the emotion on the sidelines. And again, we don't see everything behind closed doors, but I do think whoever they do bring in is going to have that kind of excitement level, or have that kind of ability to generate some more buzz amongst the players, the fans, the donors, you know, everyone around the program, because right now it's kind of a stale product.
That's a good point, because I do think that factors in. I think the guys that, if you want to call it losing the team or what have you, I feel like the guys that tend to do that are the guys that lack energy a little bit, because another guy that I'm thinking of is he's a pro coach, but Matt Eberflus, that seemed to happen with the Bears last year, and he kind of seemed to be the anti-Dan Campbell to me, which was then made it ironic that they hired Ben Johnson, but it made a lot of sense, because I thought they wanted somebody like that, whereas Smith, I do think can be a pretty good technical coach. He seems to be a good recruiter, but once you do kind of lose the guys, you need somebody to help pick up that slack a little bit. One name, I was kind of browsing names while we're talking here and looking at some of the Spartans wire coverage. One name that I was surprised by that you talked about, you referenced the article, was Pat Fitzgerald. I'm curious how that one came around, because I didn't think of him, but there are different categories for this. You've got maybe legendary coaches that retired or called it quits or got fired, and we talked about kind of that tier. Then you've got, like you said, the up-and-comers that maybe didn't get the big job yet, and you're trying to identify the next guy. And then the other category is a guy that maybe had a similar job or a higher job, but then got fired or didn't necessarily work out at that school. I guess Franklin's technically in that category, and then Fitzgerald would be too, coming from Northwestern here.
Yeah, no, I think Pat Fitzgerald's another interesting name that's going to come up. You know, obviously the reasoning for why he was dismissed at Northwestern wasn't, you know, a standard situation, and I know he was essentially, you know, vindicated, or, you know, he won his lawsuit with the university. So, but that kind of in the rearview mirror now. And I don't think the details ever came out of how much he ended up winning in that lawsuit. It could be a matter of, if he wants to get back into coaching, I think it certainly is a guy you got to call. If not, maybe he's fine being retired and enjoying, you know, the money he got out of that and all the years he spent coaching. But if he's interested in getting back into coaching, that's definitely a guy that you got to consider. Because if you've won the Big Ten, I think he took Northwestern to the Big Ten championship game at least once, maybe twice. And that's just, you know, you don't see that Northwestern, right? So he knows how to win the Big Ten. The only, I think, potential drawback to a guy like Pat Fitzgerald would be, you know, winning at Northwestern is a little bit different than winning at Michigan State, right? I mean, Northwestern, obviously, there's a lot of academic hurdles, and you know, Fitzgerald played at Northwestern, so, you know, you kind of get back into that dilemma potentially of, you know, do they have the same passion when they come to Michigan State? I mean, we're seeing that kind of with Jonathan Smith right now, right, where that's another thing people question is, you know, he left his alma mater to come to Michigan State. Would it be the same with Fitzgerald coming from Northwestern to Michigan State? So, again, you know, he's won very well in the Big Ten. You'd be silly not to call him and at least engage with him and see where his level's at. Because again, if you can win the Big Ten at Northwestern, you could probably win at most schools. So definitely a name to consider. Again, there's so many ways they can go. I think the biggest thing though at this point is they probably just need to find a way to move on from Jonathan Smith and figure out a way to make it work where they're not going to financially hinder themselves too much, but then also kind of keep the fan base happy. Because I don't, you know, unfortunately, I bought into Jonathan Smith. I thought it was going to work out. We had the conversation before the year that I could, you know, see them potentially winning 8-9 games, maybe even 10, you know, but it hasn't gone that way. And I think at this point in time, I don't know how you bring them back for another year, and I don't know how you don't move on at this point.
I really could have seen it going the same direction too. I was kind of on that path with you, and what's crazy to think of is the fact that we were talking about them potentially, you had an article at the time talking about them being this year's Indiana, and in a weird way, Indiana was this year's Indiana. They just took it to another level, but with a coach, that's what I've been marveling at in this whole process, because admittedly, as an Indiana fan, I think I'm supposed to I'm excited, but I don't know how to to take it. I can't brag as an Indiana fan. Like, that doesn't work. Yeah. We've been bad for a lot of years. That doesn't really work. But I marvel at the fact, when we're talking about the head coaching search, that Cignetti was available for Indiana to grab at this age and this point in his career. I know that's easier to say now, but even with his resume before he was picked up, the fact that he was under Saban at Alabama, and then he had such success at James Madison and everywhere he went, and he's very high up in the overall winning percentage here overall. It's wild to me that Indiana was able to scoop him up, and then I had a lot of people that were worried about, oh, well, now he's going to leave because he was going to ascend. But that's not really a threat, as much of a threat for a guy like that, where this is his first Power 5 job, and he's a little bit older, so he's not necessarily looking to ascend. And why would you leave IU? You've turned them into a top 5 program, and now they're cheering you on and behind you in a way that if you went to another school, that would be pretty tough. That's why Franklin got ousted from Penn State, because he was doing well, but not well enough. That's going to be harder to do for Cignetti to get booted, because it would have to take years of sustained success and then have the IU fans treat the football program like they treat the basketball program. But it's just amazing to me that type of guy was available. So now that when we look at these other Big Ten jobs, Michigan State historically is a better job than IU, so you would hope they could pick up somebody of that level. But the fact that somebody like that was out there was interesting, and I'm curious if they can hopefully find, for the Spartans fan base, find somebody like that.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, it's almost, again, the success that Cignetti has had at Indiana, I don't think anyone could have predicted. No one. And if they told you they predicted this, they're crazy, because I don't think anyone in their right mind would have predicted what they did last year and then this year. I mean, not only are they winning games, but they're looking like they're on the same level as an Ohio State or an Alabama, right? I mean, if you put them on the same field, you actually this year could believe they could beat them. So it's kind of nuts to think what he's done there in such a short amount of time. So no one could have predicted it. I don't know. I can't sit here and tell you whoever Michigan State gets is going to do that, but they need to find someone that can at least get half of that or 3/4 of what Cignetti's done, because quite frankly, when you compare what Jonathan Smith's been doing compared to what Cignetti's been doing, it's not even a comparison. They started at the same time, and I don't even think Michigan State fans are necessarily expecting, Jonathan Smith to be at the same level as the Cignetti. It's just not even, we're not even having the same conversation right now, right? So going back to, what you were saying, could Michigan State find that person? I would love if they could. Now, do I think they will? Probably not. But if they can find someone in between there, would be great even in itself. And even the guy who replaced Cignetti at James Madison, Bob Chesney, is another guy that they need to keep an eye on, because I think that could be maybe the next Cignetti. You never know, right? So it's like you got to keep taking your shots. You got to keep trying. If it's not working now, there's no point in extending it out any further. Let's move on to the next guy. And it's easy for me to say, because I'm not the one who's going to pay the, $31 million buyout that Jonathan Smith would get if they let him go and he doesn't find a job elsewhere. But it does kind of feel like if they keep stringing it along and they don't take that chance on potentially finding their own Cignetti, they're only going to set the program further and further behind.
The buyouts are crazy now, because they get such a soft landing afterwards, where it's like, well, I don't have to do anything after this if I don't want to. But it'll be interesting to see who they find. I do think they can pull somebody pretty decent here. The James Madison guy is a good reference there, because I do think people are going to be looking to that program now because of the success of Cignetti and the continued success of the program. But interesting stuff. I see the Michigan State game is going on the basketball side, so I want to switch to that here with Robert Bondy after the break. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with friend of the show, Robert Bondy of Spartans Wire. I didn't realize when we booked this interview that we'd be booking it right in the middle of the first Spartans basketball game here, Robert. So you're probably trying to watch that on the side or have it ready to catch up with after the show. But I'm curious what you think of the Spartans season, kind of as a season preview, like we did for the football side of things, like we just talked about. I really liked this Spartans team last year. There were, I think, a lot of things to like. There was a lot of likable players. I think they were one of, I don't know how many, 10 teams or so that had a legitimate chance to win the whole thing last year. Even once you got into the tournament, things would have had to break their way, and you'd have to get some pretty star-making performances. But they retained a decent amount of players. Richardson went to the NBA, as he probably should have, but they got a lot of veterans back. I think they're the only team. Are they the only team in the Big Ten to return their starting five from last year? So I'm curious what you think of this team here as the season kicks off here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Because last year they went into the season and they probably actually had lower expectations coming into the year than this year's team did. But they had, as you mentioned, Jace Richardson emerge as a star, and they got obviously better play out of other players throughout the season, and they quickly kind of just became dominant, right? So losing Richardson and losing Akins, you kind of do lose your top two scorers, or your kind of two guys that can make shots for themselves and guys who can, if you need a bucket, you can lean on. At least comparing to last year's squad, right? That's going to be a tough break for them, but they have talent, right? I mean, they do return, I think, 4 of their main 5 pieces between Jackson Kohler, Carson Cooper, Jeremy Fierce Jr., and then of course Colin Carr, the freak athlete. So they have 4 guys that I think could be a great nucleus, and then it just comes down to can any of those 4 become superstars? Can any of those 4 become dominant? And then if not, or at least they can improve enough, do you get someone else that maybe becomes your Jace Richardson of this year's team and emerges down the stretch, or emerges late in the year as kind of a maybe you didn't see it coming guy? I do like some of the pieces they added in the portal. Trey Fort is going to be a guy who right now I think is coming off the bench for him behind Kurt Tang at that 2 or that shooting guard spot. But I like his potential. I like what he could potentially do long term for the Spartans, and he could be maybe that sharp shooter that fills in some of that role from Jane Akins and Jace Richardson that you lost off last year's team. But it's again, it's going to be very similar to last year, too, though. They have probably about 10 guys they can run deep with. It's just a matter of who's going to become that star, or who can become that guy that can maybe elevate them to a new level. Because right now, I'd say when you look across the Big Ten, they're probably in that, maybe 4th, 5th, 6th, range on the high end. But they also, the Big Ten's so deep that you could easily find yourself back in the middle of the back, too, if guys don't emerge.
It is similar to the football side and kind of the depth thing here with the Big Ten, or the Big 18, as it were. But I should clarify when I say return their starting 5. I think they're the only team that the 5 that they're starting this year were actually on the roster last year with all the turnover in the portal and everything. But I do see that Kurt Tang, because I think he was the most tenuous one on the starting 5. I see he's off to a good start here. It looks like his line is looking pretty decent. So I'm curious how he'll do, because he mainly just was kind of in the game in garbage time for the most part. He got into the back end of the rotation at times last year, but he's a guy we didn't see a ton of. Whereas, that front court is going to be pretty strong. I liked what Cooper did last year. He was showing a lot of versatility. Kohler, I think, could be a key for this team if he kind of is able to harness his energy from last year and kind of develop some of the skill set. He's got a lot of skills for that kind of wild style that he plays the game in. And then same with Carr, with his athleticism. If you can get some jumpers out of those big guys, then you're looking pretty good in that front court.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think it's one of the things they said over the offseason. Carson Cooper's kind of worked on his jump shot. He's a big guy in the post, but if he can extend the floor, that really makes his game even more dimensional and gives him more to it. Kohler last year, I think, proved that he could play from the outside in as well. And Colin Carr is another player who's just, when he first came in as a freshman, he was known for all his highlight dunks and blocks, but he's really evolved in the last 2 years. And I mean, this is the year where if he's going to, potentially make his way in playing in the NBA and try to, be more than just that freak athlete, he's got to put it all together. So I think ultimately, if Michigan State's going to, be above, if they're going to be a second weekend team in the NCAA tournament or further, they're going to need someone like Colin Carr to become a superstar. They're going to need, a Jackson Kohler and a Colin Carr to, at least elevate their games enough. Because I think with Fears running the point, you have that guy, and I think Kurt Tang could be another guy is in that bucket too of if he can step up, right? You have some decent and really high floor guys, with this roster. It's a matter of do they want to become, elite, or they want to get to that level of last year where they're contending for an actual Final Four, and beyond that, they're going to need some guys to step up. And it's the unknown, because some of these guys were mostly role players last year. But they had so many good role players mixed with a couple superstars. You really only need maybe one or two of those guys to become superstars, or at least elevate their level to all Big Ten, let's just say, with the other guys still being high-end role players. So it's a good roster. It's going to be, I think, a very good team. I think, never say never, because you would, anything can happen, but I would be pretty surprised if this team didn't at least make the NCAA tournament and, win a game in the tournament. But we'll see, because, anything can happen. I'd say, a couple years ago when they were, I think, number 2 in the preseason, they were having to win against Northwestern late in the year just to make the tournament as a bubble team. I could have never predicted that. I would assume we won't be in that position this year. We'll see, though, when it all comes down in the end, because the long season, the openers tonight, I think it probably snuck up on a lot of people, because I know all the Big Ten teams, I think, are playing their openers tonight on a Monday in November, that people are so focused on football. But we'll see. I like what they have. It's just a matter of can they go from, pretty good to great like we saw last year.
Well, this is, I think, why they're giving us an extra day here, or extra hour over the weekend here to watch more sports, because it's coming up fast between the season overlap, and then baseball just ended. But that 3-4 combo, I feel like that's where you could really have some production between Carr and Kohler, because with more usage, like you said, there was a lot of usage that went away. I was a big Akins fan. Richardson developed throughout the season, but Kohler kind of strikes me as their version of Isaiah Stewart. He doesn't have the defensive prowess necessarily. He's a good defender, but he's not like a post defender blocking a ton of shots in the same way. But he's a versatile defender. He's a high effort guy. He seems to bring a lot of energy when he comes to the floor, and you can kind of see everybody else kind of lift their game up when that happens. But between that and his surprising ability to hit the three, which Stewart has gone back to that this year, between him and Carr, I feel like somebody out of that could be, like you said, one of their star players, because somebody's got to take the mantle. They lost a lot of leadership. They lost between Akins and then Richardson, even as a young guy, and then a lot of points and scoring and assists and guard play. I think Fears should probably take that mantle to a degree, because his brother obviously has been playing very well. Not that always transfers, but he looked like a guy that could be developing this year too. Fears, I think, is, he's going to be your stereotypical Michigan State point guard. I think he's, the big thing against him last year, and I think that's why maybe some people sleep on his ability, is, he wasn't a great shooter. And I think you got to remember he came off that, tragic injury in the, off the court during that freshman season. I think it seems like now he's back to full strength. And if he can get his offensive game going, where he's hitting threes and you're making him actually have to honor his shot, he's going to be dangerous, because he can see the floor very well with his assists and the way he just runs the point for Michigan State. So I trust him to be pretty darn good. I think you're right that if Kohler can continue to elevate his game, he's going to be a big factor for them. It's like I said, it's hard to even predict who's going to be that guy that steps up, because they have so many guys that could be it. As long as one or two become those alphas, let's just say, for them, then they're going to be pretty darn good, because they have so much depth. And again, you have an off night from one of your stars, if you have somebody that can pick it up, that goes a long way, especially when you're talking about college athletes like this. They can go nights on, nights off. So they have the depth. They need someone, though, or at least a few of them, to become elite, for them to be that, like I said, second weekend or beyond team in the NCAA tournament. It'll be interesting to watch this team this year. We'll be keeping an eye out on them. That's part of the reason we wanted to do the programming switch, so we had more room to cover college basketball during the season, during the football season, because we had to kind of delay it last year. So we'll be keeping up with Robert Bondy and his coverage, and we'll be getting him back on. But be sure to tell the people where they can follow your great coverage here, Robert.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I'm always writing the Spartans Wire. It's a USA Today affiliate, but if you just search Spartans Wire in your Google tab, you'll find us. We always got great work, me and my peers. And then I also am available on X for my opinions and retweeting and all that good stuff. That's Robert Bondy 5.
Be sure to follow him. He's got great Spartans coverage and sports coverage of all kinds. He used to cover the Lions and different teams as well. And we'll look forward to having you back on the show soon here, Robert. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, definitely. No, I always appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. We'll talk to you soon.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh is brought to you by Mary Freebed, Collectible Insurance Services, West Michigan Eye Care Associates, Eric Hall, DDS, Calder Financial Group, Grand Management, Rydan Investments, JH Realty Partners, and Encore Business Group. Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh airs live Monday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern on Jethro.fm.
Stay informed and stay vigilant.